Sanbonani Dumelang, good evening and welcome to episode 221 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Uzamantungwa Kumalo. If you're joining us for the first time, well, you've certainly missed out on quite a lot of great episodes that we have brought to your screens. So do make sure that you go to our Facebook and YouTube page to catch up on all the great property content that we've already aired. And to all our regular viewers, welcome to it, the hottest property talk show, of course, in South Africa. We come to your screens every single weekday at 7 p.m. where we tackle a property issue that helps us better navigate our property journey. Doesn't matter whether you're a landlord, you're a tenant, you're looking to buy, to sell, or perhaps even build. This certainly is the show for you. As usual, you know how we like to make the property circle bigger. So do share this live with your friends and family if you're watching us on Facebook, so that they can also catch what, of course, you are watching. And of course, one of the great things that we love talking about here on the Private Property Podcast is the great competition that we are currently running. I am talking about the Sherlock Holmes hunt that is now in its 9th week. And all you have to do for the Sherlock Holmes hunt is go to our website on www.privateproperty.co.za, where you'll be able to find the clue that we also post across our social media platforms. And we want you to crack the riddle. So let us know where the riddle takes you. And in the event where you get it right, well, you stand a chance of walking away with a 5,000 Rand voucher on Friday, right here on the Private Property Podcast. And because we said we love making things bigger, and one of the other things we love making bigger is, of course, the Winner's Circle. Now, we also give away a spot prize every Wednesday and Thursday of 500 Rand in cash. And that, of course, goes to somebody we call. So you need to have entered the competition. And in the event where we call your name, you have to be watching us live so you can claim that prize. So do make sure that you always stay tuned in and, of course, enter that competition, and you might be walking away with that 500 Rand in cash. Now, the clue for the 9th week of the Sherlock Holmes hunt, I think all the KZN viewers are probably going to find this one easy. I know in some weeks it's been of wheels. Well, that is the riddle for week 9 of our Sherlock Holmes hunt. All the best to you at home. If you're going to enter this one, we do hope that you'll be able to crack the riddle. Now, of course, one of the other great things that you're able to look forward to every single evening isn't just the Private Property Podcast with myself, Uzamantungwa Kumalo, but also the other great shows that come to your screens at 8 p.m. As it is a Tuesday, Umbali Nogo will be bringing you the Farming Podcast at 8 p.m. And that show comes to your screens on Tuesdays and on Thursdays. So if you've got some green fingers and you want to explore all things agriculture, then that is the show to tune into. Now, tomorrow evening at 8 p.m., Essie Claassen will be in conversation with somebody who's walked that first-time home buying journey. And you want to make sure that you tune into that one because it gives you a great sense of what other people went through when they bought their first property and some of the decisions that they had to make and some of the, obstacles that probably stood in their way had to overcome. And if you at home have a great story about that first property that you bought, then do slide into our DMs. Essie Claassen may feature you on the First Time Home Buyers Show on Wednesday at 8 p.m. And on Mondays and Friday, Chad brings you the Home Shoppers Show also at 8 p.m. So if you're in the market for a new property, well, that is a show that you simply do not want to miss out on. We certainly do have quite a lot of content for you on private property and across our social media platforms. So do continue engaging us on social media, on our website. And of course, you can follow myself on social media at Zamantungwa_K on Twitter as well as on Instagram. Now to get started with our conversation this evening, this is one of those conversations that I think oftentimes we don't want to think about, but we definitely need to know of because it can affect whether yourself or perhaps even a loved one. And it's also just something you want to make sure that you are not only aware of, but you are alert about so that it doesn't happen to you. We're looking at, decoding real estate phishing scams. And I know that oftentimes there's so many different kinds of scams that we can can fall prey to, and we always have to be alert. Well, this evening we're going to be looking at how you go about spotting them. What are they? How exactly do they even look like? And how can we make sure that we safeguard ourselves as much as possible? And to you at home, I want to know if you've ever been scammed, especially when it relates to property. I know that there are all kinds of scams, and all of us probably have, a story of how we were once scammed. But have you ever been scammed when it comes to real estate? And if so, how did you go about resolving that? Well, to help us better understand this, I'm joined this evening by Coetzee, who's the head of group acquisition at Ooba Home Loans. Mark, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Evening, Zama. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's only a pleasure. Now, Mark, I think this is one of those topics that sometimes can be, very uncomfortable to talk about, but it's such a necessary conversation to have, because we obviously don't want to, fall prey to any kind of scam, especially right now. I mean, when I look at where we are, even from a financial perspective as, consumers, this is the last thing that we probably want to happen to you. Now, when we talk about real estate sort of phishing scams, what kinds of scams are we effectively talking about?
Yeah, Zama, I mean, it's been a tough time for everybody, I suppose. And the fact that we're all working from home at the moment and we're doing these sorts of things on our laptops, we're exposing ourselves so much more to the ability for people to scam us. So, I mean, in real estate, there's a couple of things that guys really have to watch out for. It's specifically where you're paying money in the form of a deposit, or wherever somebody asks a potential buyer to deposit money. These are the kind of things that guys have got to be really, really careful of. Make sure you do your due diligence on the agents that you're working with. Never pay money up front for anything that
Mark, I actually want us to look at the deposit factor, because that one is, and we were even briefly talking about it off air. It's one of those, I want to say contentious, but you and I know that it's actually not so contentious. It's unfortunately that not a lot of people know how to best navigate it. Oftentimes there are some buyers who want to pay the deposit into an agent's account, and we know how unsafe that is. Perhaps take us through how buyers should be, handling the deposit, how they should make sure where the deposit is going so they don't get scammed when it comes to their deposit.
Yeah, good questions. I mean, in the property transaction cycle, 50% of property transactions are going to require a deposit. So depending on the bank's lending criteria, they may ask a buyer to put down a deposit, and generally that's around about 10% of the property purchase price. And there's ways that that deposit is requested. I would absolutely do my due diligence and make sure that you're paying that money into a trusted source. The problem that we're having in real estate at the moment is fraudsters are intercepting email communication. So the big problem that's going around the market now is somehow they're logging or they're hacking into the system and the communication trail via email between the buyer, the real estate agent, and the conveyancing attorney, and they're intercepting the communication. So they're timing the communication really, really well. They're finding out exactly when the deposit is due, and then they're impersonating the conveyancing attorney. They're then saying, here you go, I'm the conveyancing attorney that's handling your transaction. This is the amount that's due, pay it into this bank account. And obviously that bank account number that's sent via email is fraudulent. You innocently make that deposit payment, and before you know it, that amount of money is transferred 3 or 4 times, disappears overseas, and you're in a predicament where you've lost that deposit as a buyer. It's reared its ugly head over the last couple of years and has become a lot more prevalent over the last little while we're sitting in this unfortunate COVID situation. Phishing happens through communication channels like email. Those are the big dangers.
And Mark, I think one of the things that I know would sometimes typically happen, especially when we, obviously communicate via email, is often people get into a lot of public Wi-Fi hotspots. And those can be relatively, I'll say, dangerous in the context of, hackers being able to gain access to what you're essentially doing on your machine. You tend to find that a lot of these public Wi-Fi spots are not particularly secure. So when you sort of go onto them, you're exposing essentially yourself to potential hackers. I mean, I remember having a conversation with a data scientist friend of mine who was saying they never log on to any public Wi-Fi at all because the majority of them just aren't secure enough, and any hacker, they don't even have to be that sophisticated, can essentially get access to your details on your device, whichever one is logged onto that Wi-Fi platform. And as you can imagine, so many of us are working at home. Some people are probably working, let's say, in coffee spots and making use of a lot of these public Wi-Fi hotspots. And unfortunately, it does mean that you're also opening yourself up to potentially, whether it's hacked or certainly hackers having access to very private details that goes through in your emails.
Yeah, be very careful. When you're sitting in public spaces and you're on public Wi-Fi, available public Wi-Fi, the scamsters are sitting around you, and often watching what passwords you're entering into the system. And we are all, unfortunately, human, so we all save the same password. My password for my bank account and for my login to my laptop's the same. And once they've done that and they've picked up what your password is, they have access to all of your information. They can access your bank accounts, and they can start really cleaning you out, and then obviously start impersonating you. So once they've cloned you and your personality, you're in a lot of trouble when it comes to protecting your assets.
We are taking your questions and comments at home as we talk about real estate phishing scams. And I certainly want to hear from you at home if you've ever come across any of them. Perhaps you yourself have been scammed, or somebody who has. How did you go about resolving it? And we've got a comment here coming through from one of our top fan gang members, Umatha Shinani, saying, I've heard of one horror story where one bought a house from a bogus agent, like a whole house paid in full. Then they couldn't move into the house because it wasn't even being sold. And I mean, Mark, we were even talking off air about this exact scenario because I've also heard of, something exactly like this. I think one of the big things then, Mark, is how do we go about spotting some of these scams? Because as you rightfully pointed out, when you were talking to us, is that sometimes a lot of these scammers will know where in the property transaction you are, and then they'll send you a message saying that they're the conveyancing attorney, even though they're not, and they'll give you this, bank account. And obviously, as a normal, buyer, you wouldn't suspect anything untoward because they would have probably put it down on a company letterhead and whatnot. So how do we go about almost spotting if we are essentially being scammed or not?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is, and it's a cliche, but just be vigilant and double check everything. Now, the minute you get asked to pay money in any form to an account, double check that. Is it the person that you think it is? Because an email is very simple to scam and get involved in and change bank details. So pick up the phone that conveyancing attorney, and double check that person and those bank details are actually valid, or make use of facilities like Buyers Trust where, there's these safe options where deposits can be made. That situation where the viewer is mentioned, I mean, that's really, really unfortunate. And you hear a lot of those horror stories. Again, nobody's ever going to ask you to make a payment to view a property. If they're doing that, alarm bells must go off, and you must say to yourself, this isn't the way things need to be done. An estate agent must be registered with the Estate Agents Affairs Board. They must have a Fidelity Fund certificate. So double check those. That information is public, and make sure that you're dealing with reputable agents. Otherwise, you end up in these situations where you can be compromised. And the other thing is, that happens a lot when it comes to deposits on rentals as well. Be vigilant with that, and make sure that you're in the property when you're making those deposits for that property.
Mark, as you talk about deposit on rentals, there's one of the buildings where I've bought into, there seems to be a recurring scam, and it's the same person who runs it every single year. And oftentimes that particular building, it's largely, a student building. There are some young professionals as well. So they know that roundabout that December, January period, it's fairly quiet because obviously students are not there. So new tenants would typically start in February. So what they would do, there are some owners who would leave their, the key to their units with security, because if there's somebody who wants to come view, then, security is able to give them access to go up. So essentially this person has now, cracked that is something that happens and is able to get access to a particular unit and will, every year puts up the ad, puts up the pictures, and people come and they're able to physically view it. It's empty. And then they'll say that they're quite happy with it. They pay this person a deposit only to find that actually that's not the rightful owner, because obviously now they need to arrange essentially moving in. And so I think that's also something for tenants to be very aware of. And I like the tip that you've given us, Mark, that you also just need to verify the account that you are paying the money to. So it's either you can call up the conveyancing attorneys to verify that that is in fact their banking details. But another thing, I know one of the banks that I bank with has that function where when you're paying somebody, you're able to essentially check if that is in fact their banking details. I think it's for a nominal amount, probably like less than 20 rands, to just verify that that is essentially the correct account detail for that name, because you sometimes find that people will give you the wrong name, but their account number is the same. So being able to verify small things like that, it may cost you an extra 20 rands, but you've essentially saved yourself quite a lot of money down the line. Now, we are taking more of your questions and comments at home. And so we've got a comment here from Utsapo Mokubudi on Facebook saying, regarding deposits, is it possible and advisable to keep your deposit in your account until the sale goes through, then pay the seller directly, or transfer it to the transferring attorney to receive on behalf of the seller?
Yeah, no. So you can't keep it in your own account unless you raise a bank guarantee, and a bank guarantee is fairly costly. So if you're an affluent buyer, maybe that's an option for you. The general way that you pay a deposit, and it's been traditionally the way it's been paid for buying a property over many years, is you transfer it into the attorney's conveyance, or the conveyancing attorney's trust account. And obviously, this is where this fraud kicks in, is where they're impersonating the transfer attorney, and you end up paying it into somebody's account that's not the transferring attorney. So be vigilant and double check that it is the transferring attorney. And guys like us, like ooba, we've created a facility where buyers can pay money into a trust account, into an account in their own name, and we store that money in a safe environment in buyer's trust. So that's an option that you guys must look into as well if you're a buyer, where you can pay the money into an account in your own name that we create for you. Obviously the big dangers are, make sure that everything is encrypted. So that it's password protected when you're dealing with that, you're receiving a one-time PIN. These are the kind of protections that we've created inside of the buyer's trust facility with ooba.
We've got another comment here. It's coming from Clarence Smith, who says it's a sad reality that it mostly happens in the low to middle class areas. People need to know that an estate agent needs to produce an FFC when selling a property, and I think it is one of those unfortunate things. But as we've certainly picked up, Mark. Unfortunately, these scams don't only affect, we'll say, lower LSM. I've seen people in high LSM easily also get scammed. I think more often than not, when you don't know the knowledge, you simply don't know it, sort of regardless of which, where your tax bracket essentially is. I think one of the things we know about scammers is that they're equal opportunity scammers more often than not, and they'll kind of spread their net as wide as possible and see who they're able to catch in between.
Yeah, Zaba, we've had incidents. We obviously deal closely with real estate, and our real estate partners have brought this problem to us and said, help us address this problem. And you'd be very surprised. We've had massive amounts of fraud going on in big real estate transactions to the value of 5 million rand, as an example. So it might be very prevalent in the lower sort of purchasing brackets, but like you say, people don't discriminate. The bigger the amount, the more sophisticated it becomes.
Yeah, that is true. We've got a comment here coming from Mike Addison. Of course, we had him as a guest, and he's saying that serious problem, email hacking. It's difficult to spot. It's prevalent in sectional title environment. Agents, managing agents and schemes need, commercial crime, cyber crime cover. Always double check and re-verify account numbers provided by email, phone the company and confirm account numbers telephonically. Because unfortunately, this
Exactly
is also
right.
one of the things, if you're living in a sectional title community, perhaps it can be, being sent your levy statement and they just tweak the account number. Sometimes they might get wind of who lives in that particular sectional title community and say that they've now changed their banking details. So every time something like that happens, I always sort of verify, did you in fact, change the banking details? Because you don't know if that authentically comes from, of course, the managing agents or whoever you're dealing with on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, these scamsters are exceptionally patient. So once they've hacked into an email facility, they'll track the conversation over a long period of time, and they'll time the scam to the perfect, date and time of when a payment is actually due. So, as a human, I'm supposed to be making this payment. The invoice arrives, and we just go about making that payment and trusting that those bank details are the ones that they should be, and you end up being scammed. So he's 100% right. Always double check that those bank details are accurate, validate them, and then make those payments.
Mark, earlier on you mentioned something that I actually wanted to pick up on. You mentioned how one of the ways that we can potentially spot a scam is if an agent says that you should make a payment before you view an apartment, and this is whether you're looking to rent or you're looking to buy. That's a scam. We don't see instances where you need to pay for a viewing regardless of renting or selling. I'm interested to hear from you because I know that a lot of agents have started asking people's FICA documents and wanting to first almost pre-qualify them, for example, when they are buying a property to see if they can afford a place before they even view the place. Same with when people want to, for example, rent, they want your FICA documents almost up front before they arrange a viewing. How can viewers at home navigate that one? I mean, on the one hand, I'll say I understand potentially whether an agent and a serious agent is coming from. They want to deal with a serious buyer or somebody who's serious in terms of renting. But also from the consumer side, I'm not going to be handing over my FICA documents every time I want to view a new property, whether I'm buying it or looking to rent.
Yeah, I mean, the initial question is, should you be paying money up front before you view a property? No, that's illegal. If somebody's asking you to do that, they're in breach of the regulations of the State Agency Affairs Board, and that's completely illegal. So be very careful of that. And if they start featuring you before you've actually decided that you're going to start renting or buying that property again, you shouldn't be going through those processes. You should only, and FICA is vitally important. You have to be FICA'd. That's part of the process of actually making sure that you are the person who you say you are, and that you are the person that's going to be able to buy and facilitate the rental. So that FICA process is absolutely paramount, but it must only happen once you've made the decision to actually buy that property, you've signed the offer to purchase, then the FICA process begins. Being FICA'd up front is not quite the right way of doing things.
We've got a question coming from Glad Shirinda asking, is it right or legal for a homeowners association to charge agents a fee to gain access in selling properties in an estate or to get an accreditation?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I suppose I'm not an expert there, but I can tell you that a lot of the estates have memberships that the agents have to become part of. So some of the estates don't want a huge number of estate agents working inside of that development, so they have to register and pay some fees to remain on the roll to actually show potential buyers properties inside of that estate. So, I know that is a practice that does certainly happen, and it seems to be common practice.
Now, Mark, we've certainly looked at what these scams are, the various ways that they can manifest, and how we can go about spotting them. So, how can we then go about safeguarding ourselves? Because I'm sure there are probably now people who are slightly anxious about, their phones or even, your laptop and what might be out there. But how do we best safeguard ourselves so that we don't fall victim to some of these scams?
I mean, Zama, when you're making a property purchase and you get asked to pay a deposit for that deposit, make sure that you're dealing with a reputable number. Firstly, estate agent, and number two, that you know that and trust that conveyancing attorney that's handling that process. The other obvious way to make sure that you're paying a deposit and that deposit is safe is to utilize facilities like Buyers Trust. Uber's created a separate business called Buyers Trust. And the sole purpose of that business is to make sure that buyers' deposits are safe from phishing, guaranteed that they're kept there in a facility that is untouchable by fraudsters. So, Google www.buyerstrust.co.za, have a look and see it. We'll make contact with us and we'll take you through that process. If you're a buyer and you're about to make that property deposit, look into facilities like that where we've used technology to ensure that email communication where bank details are passed between parties it doesn't happen. All of the communication happens on the platform itself. So, we have two facilities inside of Buyers Trust. The one is an app that a buyer can download, and then all communication happens on platform inside of that app. And the other one is inside of a web link. And again, all of these, when you get asked to make a payment, if we know who you are, you're the one that's passworded to receive the information.
And Mark, I certainly also just want to hear from you on perhaps how renters can also go about safeguarding, themselves, because I think they're also unfortunately fall victim to some of these scams. And I think when we look at renters, there are usually so many, I'll say, upfront costs that they sometimes worry if, they are valid or not valid, admin fees and all kinds of costs. So how can people who are in the rental market then also best safeguard themselves against some of these scams?
I'm going to be cheeky and tell them that they should be buying now because the property market is really playing in their favor.
No, Mark, we're going to let them rent, because if everybody buys, who's going to be renting from those of us who own property? So, of course, we must have renters. So how can the renters safeguard themselves?
Through the property chain. But yeah, I mean, rentals are a very difficult and different animal. I mean, you've got to understand that there's such a lot of demand for one specific property. So, there's scamsters out there that are preying off that. And, when your lease comes to an end and you're really desperate to find another property, you end up doing things that you probably shouldn't. So, that is an area where a lot of these things, skullduggery is happening. And make sure, first and foremost, that you're checking on platforms that are reputable, that validate that property is for rent. And you guys as private property do a particularly good job. You validate that every single property that is for rent is actually available and for rent. So you're safeguarding your property shoppers to a degree through the process of looking on private property. But then the second part is, if you're looking through an estate agent, make sure that estate agent is a qualified agent, that you know who they are, that you've done your sort of referral homework, and you've made sure that if you're working with somebody that you can associate them back to somebody else who've been referred by somebody, that this agent is good and is not going to take advantage of you, and then just be vigilant. Don't go and pick up keys and view properties with a security guard. When those sort of things start happening, if it's too good to be true, it generally is. That's the rule that I would certainly follow.
We've got a comment here from Clarence Smith saying, on the fee cut documents issue, it's more of a security issue. Estate agents have become easy targets for criminals to rob them, etc. And that's also just one of the unfortunate things when you live in South Africa and the nature of the crime that we have. I've also heard of quite a number of horror stories from some estate agents, especially estate agents who are women, and how they've had to almost run their business slightly differently in order for them to remain safe, because more often than not, when you're, of course, doing viewings, it's you and the potential client that is there, and some of these properties might be in relatively remote parts of town, or where it's a bit quiet. So you also want to make sure that you're as safe as possible.
Yeah, we've heard these horror stories where people take advantage of estate agents where they're showing off a property by themselves. So yeah, just be very careful. If you're an estate agent, don't do a show house by yourself. Make sure that you've got people around you, and that use the pre-qualification processes as well. Ooba and your bond originator will be able to pre-qualify your buyer and be able to validate that this person is actually shopping. They can buy a property and they are who they say they are. It definitely does sort that out, but approach the FICA situation later to actually validate that they're not politically influenced and that that they are the person that they say they are.
Mark, before I let you go, any final tip for our viewers at home? I know that there are a lot of them who are either going to be buying new properties or certainly, moving out of home, perhaps renting your own property. So we definitely want to make sure that we're as vigilant as possible, because we would have worked this hard to take that next step in our property journey.
Yeah, so everything we've said already, if it's too good to be true, it generally is. Stay away from bargains where people are asking you to pay deposits and where the price is way lower than you think the rest of the market is. These are things that you've got to really be careful of. But before you pay anybody anything, double check that bank details are valid. Use facilities that are available, through your bond originators like Uber. We've got the buyer's trust facility, so that's the perfect way to store your deposit safely. Check it up, and then just ask questions and take the process slowly. Don't feel like you rushed into something and that you're pressurized into something that making payments that you shouldn't be. Where your sixth sense is always the one that you've got to follow. If you're feeling uneasy, put the brakes on and do your investigation and just take it slowly. If you're dealing with somebody, they won't rush you into something. You're dealing with somebody reputable, they'll help you through that process.
Well, Mark, that's a great place to leave it at. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Zama.
And that is Mark Coetzee, who's the head of group acquisition at Uber Home Loans. And I do hope that you found the tips insightful and that you're going to be extra vigilant going forward on your property journey. That's it from us at the Private Property Podcast with myself, Zamantungwa Kumalo, and the rest of the team. We'll be back on your screens tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. Well, I do not leave you alone. It is a Tuesday, so Umbali Noko will be coming to your screens at 8 p.m. with the Farming Podcast. Until then, hoping you're staying home and staying safe.